The atmosphere inside the tavern was far from ordinary. Former members of the powerful Freya family, once feared as the absolute elite of Orario, now worked as makeshift employees, serving dishes and attending tables under the direct orders of Mia, the bar owner. The change was so drastic that many were still trying to understand how this situation had become possible. Hythe, the healer, circulated through the hall carrying heavy trays, displaying an exhausted expression familiar to those who had seen her in battle, the look of someone accustomed to constant fatigue. Beside her, Hogni, a dark elf visibly out of place in that noisy environment, showed discomfort as he tried to help. The younger and less disciplined members joked about their own decline, saying that, thanks to the slaves, the work was a little easier than usual. Their punishment was simple to explain. After the fall of the Freya family and the chaos caused by their goddess, Mia decided that everyone involved should compensate for the damage. Not only out of moral responsibility, but to repair the wounds, physical and emotional, left behind. Thus, first-class warriors, once respected and untouchable, now served customers in improvised attire. Men remained in their combat clothes due to a lack of uniforms, while women were required to wear the bar's traditional green uniform, normally worn by the permanent employees. The customers' reactions ranged from surprise to excitement. Many found it curious to see legendary figures working as waiters, and some even tried to take the opportunity to flirt. However, everyone knew that crossing certain lines was asking to be knocked down on the spot, and there was more than enough force there to guarantee that. Among the customers, those who tried to act naturally soon realized the difficulty. Feigning normalcy in the face of so many hostile expressions and dangerous stares required effort. It was in this very atmosphere that Horn appeared. Her presence provoked an immediate shiver. With long, silver-gray hair covering part of her face, she wore the tavern's uniform, very different from the somber attire she usually wore. The combination made her appearance even more striking, although she showed extreme discomfort. Horn had been forgiven for her betrayal thanks to her master's decision, but that didn't exempt her from facing the consequences directly at the hands of her former companions. Hythe, for example, never missed a chance to remind her of her position, cutting her skirt to make her even more embarrassed, a symbolic, yet cruel, punishment. The young witch, visibly shaken, kept her eyes brimming with tears as she tried to hide her humiliation. To the gods who frequented the bar, she had become almost a character, an intriguing combination of cold beauty and explosive personality, which aroused curiosity and indiscreet comments. Amidst arguments, squabbles, and frustrated attempts to maintain composure, the atmosphere remained agitated. And behind it all, one truth stood out. Those who were once adored as elite now paid for every mistake, working side by side with ordinary adventurers, and facing an entire city that still observed them with suspicion. The intense activity in the tavern subsided whenever Horn passed by someone. Her name was still enough to silence conversations and provoke sharp glances. Even without wanting to draw attention, she was unable to hide. Her makeshift uniform, combined with her haphazardly tied-up hair, contrasted with her rigid posture, a reflection of the constant fear of making another mistake. When Hogni observed her from afar, his expression hardened. He still hadn't fully digested what she had done in the past, and her presence served as an uncomfortable reminder. But, curiously, he was the only one who didn't transform that resentment into gratuitous aggression. Instead, he approached and called her by name, using a firm voice, but without hostility. The impact of this was immediate. Horn stopped, as if her body had been frozen. She stared at him with wide eyes, almost unable to believe that someone still addressed her in a human way. Reflexively, she lowered her head, as if expecting a lecture, or something worse. Hogni, however, simply continued. Hythe doesn't need to cut her clothes anymore. She's already understood the message. It was impossible for her not to tremble upon hearing this. Her face turned even redder, and everything within her seemed to apologize even without words. Before she could react, a familiar shadow appeared beside them, Otter. The Minotaur's presence was so intense that the air seemed heavier. Even without armor, that didn't diminish his impact in the slightest. He wasn't there as the former captain of the Freya family. He was there as someone carrying enough guilt to bring down any wall. Seeing Horn huddled together, his gaze clouded, almost sad. I recognize the mistakes we all made, he said, his voice raspy and deep, but don't let regret destroy you. We can still clear the name we carry. It's a duty, and a promise. Horn almost recoiled, unable to bear that emotional weight. It was a cruel contrast. Before, she saw him as an unshakable force, an unquestionable leader. Now, he seemed like a broken man trying to piece together what remained of his family. Hogni, who had never shown emotion, looked away. The scene affected him more than he wanted to admit. The tension between the three was palpable, but there was something different there. For the first time since the disaster, there were no shouts, hostility, or accusations. Just three people dealing with the same pain in different ways. And deep down, they all realized the same thing. No matter how hard they tried to move on, they were still shadows of who they once were, and perhaps that tavern was the only place where they had a chance to start over. Even if it started with trays and tight uniforms. That late afternoon, the tavern seemed strangely calm. After the brief encounter between Horn, Hogni, and Otter, each had gone their own way, but the impact lingered in the air. It was as if the tension had been replaced by a silent, almost uncomfortable reflection. Horn returned to work with short steps, trying to appear invisible. However, something had changed. Her gaze was no longer as empty as in previous weeks. Even carrying too much guilt for a single person, the simple exchange of words with her former companions had stirred a place she believed to be dead within herself. Hogni, for his part, seemed more restless than usual. He had always been the type of man who observed the world with calculated coldness, but now the mask was slightly cracked. Recognizing Horn in that state brought back memories he had been trying to bury, of the family's first formation, of joint missions, of small victories that seemed insignificant but now weighed like gold. Seeing her trembling as she balanced trays, the question bothered him: to what extent were they also to blame for the ruin that followed? Otter walked to the back of the tavern and sat alone. He didn't need to say anything to the customers to change tables. His presence always had that effect. But, at that moment, he wasn't the legendary monster feared in Orario. He was just someone trying to deal with what remained of his own history. The mistakes of the past haunted him like invisible scars, and seeing Horn so fragile only reinforced the weight of what they had lost together. Little by little, the three seemed to gravitate towards each other, even without exchanging any more words. As if an invisible force kept them connected, reminding them that, however much they tried to move on, their lives were intertwined by the same broken destiny. And the tavern, normally noisy and chaotic, became the perfect setting for this silent reunion, a place where former warriors, now reduced to shadows of what they once were, tried to understand if there was still room for redemption. Although none of them admitted it aloud, they all shared the same unsettling thought. Perhaps this unexpected encounter was the first step toward something new, something they didn't even know if they deserved, but desperately needed.